Thank you very much. Would you like to start?
Thank you. I want to turn for a moment to this whole concept of legitimacy and that the authority of the government is derived from the support of the people, which Madison referred to in Federalist 39. The world today is a very, very different place. Technology has changed the way the constituents reach their elected officials. There's an enormous amount of pressure on this whole form of Republican government, if you will. So my question is that even though the Constitution says nothing about polls, current opinion polls, trumping the responsibilities of elected officials to carry out the mandate upon which they were elected during election time, it's very, very difficult to maintain that separation. What do you think Madison would have thought about the current system? Would he still have thought the same way? Would Federalist 39 still have made sense in a modern era, or might he have looked at that whole notion of connection between electorate and the elector?
I think Madison would have thought two things. First of all, I think he would have been surprised by the expanded franchise. I certainly don't think he would have expected the vast majority of citizens we now have voting to be able to vote and to be able to make wise policy decisions. I'm not sure exactly his opinion on that. Certainly late in his career, while he's in Virginia, he does support moderate reforms to the Virginia Constitution to expand the franchise. How he would view our current system, I don't know. But as to the ability of election polls to influence criteria, I think Madison wanted a separation between sovereignty and policy. That even if sovereignty of the government are derived from the people, he didn't want the policy-making bodies to be separated, which is why he institutes different institutions in the Constitution to do that. And I think technology has undercut that separation.
Though I would further argue, if we look at the historical situation within Madison was speaking, promoting this sense of good citizenship, being educated about government and being able to participate, we're looking at a society that was largely far more literate than any other society in the world at the time. And this was almost an excuse or reason why man should be involved in government. And I would say today, the technology that we have, the ability to know exactly what's going on where in the nation and to have opinions about it, is a further, almost an emphasis as to why we should be involved in government, because the connection is so much closer than maybe in Madison's time.
And I would agree with this connection. I'd say that because of the technological advancements, the government is greatly more interconnected. And so when you have the public turn against the president, for example, when he becomes less popular, Congress will be far less likely to pass the legislation he wants passed in his own agenda. So we see the public's influence continue to grow due to technological advancements.
Thank you. We're going to move on. Andy?
I wanted to challenge one of your assumptions that by forbidding titles of nobility, that political equality created a cultural and social equality. The framers seem to think of themselves as an aristocracy in the Aristotelian sense, and they expected that the government would be of the best people, the aristos. How is this not a de facto title of nobility?
I think the simplest answer is in the way in which the nobility was created. Unlike the nobilities of Europe, it was an aristocracy of merit and theoretically available to all members. If you look at the majority of the founders, of the people who signed the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, only 8 of them had fathers who attended college. If they were a nobility, they were an extremely recent nobility. And in fact, they ruled out most systems of government that were considered republics, like the Dutch Republic, because it had hereditary nobilities in the stadtholder. And I think this separates the founders' nobility and aristocracy because it is an aristocracy of merit that anyone can seek to become a part of if they put in enough work.
I think, if anything, the founders would be in favor of these individuals who they would view as morally upstanding and virtuous to go forth and serve in government. They wanted the most virtuous individuals in society who had been virtuous through education. They wanted the government to promote this education to go ahead and be a part of government, even if they were laymen. If you look at Benjamin Franklin, he'd come from very, very modest background, was still one of the most revered founding fathers of the time. And it was this sort of raising one's self-standing that the founders were in favor of.
And while they would hope that most of the people in society, if not all of them, would have the virtue that they professed that they wanted, they realized that this was perhaps impossible to have every member be an active political citizen, and therefore they wanted the best, the most qualified to truly be working on the policy functions of government.
So maybe it's just a matter of rhetoric, but Publius does argue in the Federalist paper that republicanism reflects the genius of the people. What was the genius of the Roman people, do you think? What is the genius of the American people? Is there a comparison?
Well, it depends if you're asking us now or to the founders. I think the founders did view the Roman people as being, up until their time, the best system of government on earth. Depending on who you talk to, Hamilton views it as the British system, but many of them looked at Rome as being the best example of government on earth for several reasons. I think the best reason is that Rome did have a system of elites within the society who could control and direct policy, particularly the Roman Senate. And they looked at the writings of these Roman senators as professing the very virtues they sought to uphold. Cato's writing, Cicero writing, people like that. And they wanted to instill this virtue into the citizenry if they could.
And I think if you're asking about the genius of the American people, I'm not so sure there's any one thing that you can call the American people as a whole, as a body. But I do think what distinguished the American generation from, say, Rome, and what gave them this advantage in attempting to instill the same virtues and instill the same greatness as the Roman Empire, was their newness, that they were embarking on this experiment in republicanism on this unfounded territory that didn't have this comprehensive political backdrop behind it that may have influenced it in some way.
So let me follow up just a little bit. Publius also argues in the Federalist Papers that the goal of this new regime, this new science of politics, is what he called decency. Virtue and excellence seem not to be a piece of it. What scared the drafters about the virtues and excellences of Rome that they wanted to write out of this new decent republic?
I would challenge the assumption of part of the question. I think it wasn't not just Rome, but also Greece as well.
Fine,
That when,
but take the point. Why is it that we're substituting decency for virtue?
I think when they saw the virtue and the way that virtue was enforced in the ancient republic, particularly the Greek republics like Sparta and Athens, and the extent to which government had to suppress liberty in order to force this homogeneity, that's what really scared them. Madison argues in Federalist Number 10 that he needs a republican solution to the problem. That the idea of faction checking faction is his answer to why they didn't need to enforce classical virtue. Because when you enforce classical virtue like Sparta did, it's extremely suppressive to liberty and it's extremely suppressive to the individual. And that they were afraid of doing this on a centralized level because they did care about their liberties. It's important to remember that the ancient republics did not have a sense of the natural rights the founders did.
I would
We're
continue.
aware.
I would continue my colleague's argument and simply quote Madison saying men are not angels. I think of all the founders, Madison, like you said, was more concerned with decency and this notion of having a government that would last. Posterity was on the minds of the founders constantly.
Right.
And so creating these institutions where even if virtue wasn't necessarily at the forefront, having this conflict resolution process, as my colleague stated earlier, would ensure this safety, this continuation of these institutions, even if virtue wasn't the paramount goal.
And I think
Move
this
on.
realization that the founders, that the American colonies are not the Roman colonies, allowed them to change from focusing on virtue, though they did want virtue in the citizens, to focus on what Jefferson later called enlightened selfishness.
Okay.